Buju, Kalidale, Indigenous Cause, Bemidji, Magog, and Dujeba, Makwa, Indodem. Hello everyone, my name is Callie Dale. I'm the Director of Research at the NativeBio Data Consortium, and I'm a citizen of the White Earth Nation, and I'm the Project Manager for the Tribal Data Repository Project.
Hi everyone, I'm Sakaya Perez Rivera. I work for the University of Wisconsin-Madison as their Program Coordinator, and I am of Taino descent.
Bonjour, Nindinaway Makanadok, Rebecca Dickinson, Indigenous Cause, Mikazine Dudam, Gawabakanaka, Ninawape, Michikamag, Dunchaba. My name is Rebecca Dickinson. I'm Eagle Clan. I'm a citizen of White Earth Ojibwe Nation. I live in Bemidji, and I'm a grants manager at NativeBio Data Consortium. Being the game, welcome. We are glad you have joined our session, Not Like Us, Indigenous-Led Solutions for a Tribal Data Repository. My colleagues and I are part of the Data for Indigenous Interventions, Implementations, and Innovations team, 4I's, so D4I. And we are building a tribal data repository led by Indigenous scientists. In this presentation, we will get into why this project exists and address current data sovereignty issues. So due to the fact that federal agencies operate under the expectation that tribal public health data is shared with those agencies, despite tribes receiving little direct benefit from that sharing, we are constructing the Tribal Data Repository to empower our communities to directly govern our own public health data. Its purpose is to develop responsible data sharing and management practices while advancing ethical research in public health. This National Institutes of Health funded project is a response to the need for reducing health disparities in our communities in the United States. And as you can see in the graphic over here, our solution and mission is to conduct this work through 4 different areas: the repository infrastructure, data policy that actually benefits tribal nations, true community engagement with tribes, and building educational capacity with a data science workshop and creating and sharing data sovereignty resources and policies. So today we're going to focus on describing the build, the repository infrastructure. I would like to introduce, on this slide anyway, our D4I TDR team, which is led by Indigenous investigators and trusted partners. Our team is made up of 6 different sites across Turtle Island, and NativeBio Data Consortium is the lead site for this project. NativeBio is on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, led by Joseph Iracheta. And we have partnered with the University of Wisconsin-Madison, led by Dr. Matt Anderson, University of Washington, led by Dr. Sue Trinidad, University of California, Santa Cruz, led by Dr. Ann McCartney, The Ohio State University, led by Dr. Soledad Fernandez, and Arizona State University, led by Dr. Crystal Sosi. The teams at ASU and NativeBio work on community engagement. The teams at NativeBio Madison and UCSC work on data management. The teams at OSU, ASU, and NativeBio work on ethics and law. And Dr. Trinidad at the University of Washington provides project facilitation. So today, we want you all to think of the Tribal Data Repository as a garden we use to grow good medicine for our communities. We are using this metaphor to contextualize our technical and detailed project. This data garden is just that. Think of data as the plants on tribal land. And we will describe the different parts of what makes a garden grow helpful and nourishing plants for our people, including the garden beds, the greenhouse, the water, soil quality, nutrients, sunlight, and grunt workers, the gardeners. So starting small, the plants are the tribe's public health data, which they own. The gardeners help the plants grow, and they are data stewards like our D4I team. Our plants are stored inside a greenhouse, so you can think of the greenhouse as our data repository, keeping our data secure. When the data is needed for study, think of it like a plant that is eventually transplanted into a raised garden bed for further growth. The sunlight shining on the greenhouse and on the garden beds that allows the plants to grow is a tribe's decision and voluntary participation to collect and store their data and authorize its use in research. Other gardens are not like ours. Other data repositories are not like us. As Callie will describe next, our work is rooted in Indigenous data sovereignty. Our garden is sacred, plants are our kin, our data is us. And today there are many weeds of the garden that we won't fully have time to get into, but if you have more questions, be sure to ask at the end or find us after your talk. Miigwech.
Thank you, Rebecca. First, our garden is rooted in Indigenous data sovereignty, which is the inherent right of Indigenous peoples and nations to govern their own data and information, including its collections, ownership, access, and application through its life cycle. Indigenous data sovereignty really just started as a solution to the problem of data theft of Indigenous peoples globally. And because of the concerns of secondary data use and the limited opportunities for this benefit sharing of that, there has been a lot of focused attention on the tension between that's felt between protecting Indigenous rights and interests of our data, including traditional knowledge, and supporting open data, machine learning, and broad data sharing in these big data initiatives. So the CARE principles were built to complement the existing data-centric approach represented in the FAIR guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and was made for open data sharing, whereas CARE principles stands for the collective benefit, authority, control, responsibility, and ethics. And these principles were made for guiding research with Indigenous communities in a way described by, I think best described by this quote from the paper that the principles were originally published in. Repositioning Indigenous peoples, nations, and communities from being subjects of data that perpetuate that unequal power distributions to self-determining users of data for development and well-being. And I think this really shows how us as Indigenous peoples are taking our data and using us for us, and that's what our project is doing, and we're using these principles to guide us to use local and specific protocols for each community using our repository. So just like the garden, we have to take care of the soil first. We make sure the soil has quality nutrients for optimal growing conditions, or quality principles for optimal data sovereignty. And here we have our 4 principles guiding our design and implementation for our project. And our first nutrient is stewardship, where D4I, our team, is acting as data stewards. And this requires our team have continual conversations between our team and each community that has data in our repository across the entire life cycle, before data deposition and after and throughout. Our second nutrient is privacy, where the storage of our data is always de-identified, and we understand that there are risks related to re-identifiable data, not just for individuals, but for communities that are specific to Indigenous peoples. And we understand that because as Indigenous scientists, so we have that understanding and respect. And our next nutrient is security and safety, where our data are securely enclosed in our TDR, our repository environment, and researchers need to have specific permissions to remove any products made from the use of the data in our repository, so making sure everything is safe. And finally, Indigenous data sovereignty, which as noted before, is the right of the tribal nations and communities to govern their data and determine benefits and what is not of their own data and its use. And all of these principles feed into the need to give tribal nations and communities the resources to assert their sovereignty over their own data, and how we're doing that in this project. So we are using a federated data governance model, which means that the decisions about data are shared between a central source and all the data source entities. And we can think about data governance like a watering system. And this system provides a variety of nutrients to all plants with different settings. And the Tribal Data Repository uses a federated data governance in which some parts of the Tribal Data Repository are more centrally governed, as shown on the left of this figure, and such as our security. So our team must provide a secure repository to store the tribal data. And we are responsible for upkeep of that security, and we always allow and prefer tribal input on what our security standards are, but the ultimate responsibility will fall to us. And so to keep with our metaphor, all the plants will be watered throughout our system. Where other aspects of our federated governance are more decentralized, on the right-hand side of this figure, where tribes have full control. And so to keep with our metaphor, think of how watering times can vary, and they can choose the different type and amount of fertilizer in the water. And so an aspect of our federated data governance that they have full control over would be tribes have more control of data quality. So tribes and communities would choose if their data is harmonized with other communities, and if their data quality checks are determined by us, or if they want more quality checks, and if the standards that we're choosing need to be higher. And we also allow for more decentralized integration into our repository, which means that a tribe may want to house their own data, not with us if they have their own resources, but they can still use our resources when working with researchers, and even connect to our repository through secure workspaces, which we'll talk about later. So we said our greenhouse is our repository, and we can think of our security system like the greenhouse structure and how it protects our garden. And we have a security system set up to safeguard our tribal data. And the first line of security is that of our primary server is housed at the NativeBio Data Consortium, which is housed on Cheyenne River. And we have very rigorous security standards set and shown here in this very simplified diagram of our technical security aspects. And we have security standards at the primary server level for secured and encrypted data transfer for when data comes from the community into our repository, and firewalls and key cloak access. And of course we have user portal specific security, like as you can see in this diagram. And we also have additional security safeguards of a backup server, which is housed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to ensure that the data is safe in case of any catastrophic disasters at NativeBio, creator forbid. And the data backup process involves the creation and storage of data copies situated in our primary site at NativeBio to the secondary site at Madison to ensure recovery in case of any data loss, corruption, or system failures. And the security at the backup server includes security transfer to and from the backup server. And for security purposes and tribal sovereignty alignment, D4I, tribal data repository, will not involve any cloud storage component for any part of the backup process, so no clouds in our sky. Our greenhouse also comes equipped with a lock to keep out any unwanted pests. And this lock is our data transfer ownership and use agreements, or DTOUAs. And these agreements are between the tribal nations and communities and us, D4I. And they allow for tribal data to be stored in our repository and used in accordance with the wishes of the tribes. These documents are written uniquely tailored to the needs of each nation and community that wants to store data in the repository. In these agreements, specific items will be addressed, such as if the tribe wants their data harmonized, what type of research they would want to have done, or if they just want the data stored and not used for research. So now let's go into the greenhouse.
Okay, thank you, Callie. Now I'm going to show you the inside of our metaphoric greenhouse. So data will be sent in or uploaded by communities once those DTOUAs are signed and in place. So you want to think of it like our D4I data stewards are now inside the greenhouse and they're repotting those plants. So the data will be stored in our main server at the NativeBio site, and then a continual backup will be done to our Wisconsin site. The architecture of our TDR is set up with virtual machines that serve different purposes within our server. So some are for, and they're all secure workspaces, and some are for, say, like data analysis for the researcher to use, while others could be for data storage. So think of the different plants that will be stored in there in different specialized containers. On the screen, you can see some examples of how data could flow through our repository, and one note I do want to make here is that the data in our repository can be structured or unstructured. So Community 1 in this diagram has signed a data agreement, a DTOUA, that has allowed for their data to be harmonized. They would upload the data into our server, and then we would take a copy of the data and check it for completeness and check to make sure that it is able to be harmonized. If it is, then we would harmonize it using the data dictionary that we use, and then it would be stored separately from the original data set with the other harmonized data. So in our garden metaphor, this means that two plants can be taken and grafted together to create a new hybrid plant that will then be potted specially and stored separately. So we also have a community, if we could also have a community that does not wish to harmonize their data and has stated such in their DTOUA, they would upload the data and it would not be harmonized, so it would bypass that check altogether, and researchers would have access to that data separately. Another unique example shown here is Community 5, who has chosen only to store their data in the TDR. So for this community, they would upload the data and then it would be only stored and backed up to the Wisconsin server, and there would be no harmonization of this data and there would be no researcher access to this data. But all of these are possibilities in which tribes and communities will have sovereignty over their data and the decisions surrounding its use within our tribal data repository. So in the last slide, I introduced you to that repository architecture, which is set up with those secure workspaces. Here, I want you to think of each secure workspace as an individual raised garden bed. Within those garden beds, our researchers will go to those only and only have access to their specific separated raised beds and the specific plants within them. So once data access has been granted, the researcher would log into the secure portal where they would have been given access to that workspace. No tribal nation or community data is allowed to leave the TDR, and therefore this workspace will already be preloaded with the data and the analytical software that the researcher would use to conduct their study. If a tribe or researcher wishes for other software to be added, they can request that within our portal, and then we would be able to upload that into their secure workspace. But this is why other repositories are not like us. All analysis will have to be done within the TDR workspaces, and none of the data that was used for analysis will ever be allowed to be removed from the TDR except for by the tribe or community or by our D4I team ourselves. And so this setup contributes to the security of the TDR, and also our architecture using multiple individual virtual machines and that container layout, so those secure workspaces, also prevents a researcher from accessing data in other workspaces that the researcher does not have permission to access. So for example, if a researcher were to come in with bad intentions to one of those secure workspaces, they wouldn't be able to break out of it and into another secure workspace that has a different community's data. But if you look at the diagram on the screen, you can see how researcher access would work. So in research group A, there is one researcher of that group that has been granted access and has been approved to work with the harmonized data from communities 1 and 4. This researcher would log into the secure user portal and they would be able to request access to that virtual machine secure workspace, which would then be preloaded with that data and that software. Additionally, if a researcher has signed a data agreement with a community that did not agree to harmonize their data, then the process would be the exact same as shown here, but instead of having multiple communities' data, they would just have that one community's data, and they would have to work on that separately from any other data or projects that they're working with. And then once again, this data at this stage could also be structured or unstructured. So now we're going to talk about the actual process for how data access gets approved for researchers. So in order to get access to the data, a researcher has to submit a research proposal or a request. This is a two-step process. So the first part of this process is an initial research request in which the researcher would submit a 2-paragraph summary of the type of research that they want to do, the type of data that they want to use, and potentially the community that they want to work with. This would then come into our portal and our team would review it and just check that we have the data, in fact, that they could use. If that check passes, then they would be able to submit a more detailed research request, which is part 2 of the process. In this detailed research request, they would be submitting more comprehensive information about the proposal to the tribe. This has to be tribally approved at this stage. So they would have more detailed information, they would list potentially any collaborators that they want to work with, they would list again the type of data, they would talk about ethical implications of their research, and they would talk about how this aligns with what the tribe wants and how it will benefit the tribe or the community that they want to work with. And once that gets approved, then we go through the accessing process that you saw in the previous slide. And the researcher will be able to do their research until the agreed research period is over, or until they have their research outcomes that they were looking to find. If the time period that has been granted has come to an end before their research has come to an end, the researcher can submit a request to the tribe to extend that research period, and then if that's granted, we will allow for that virtual machine space and that project to stay open longer. And then once they have found anything that they would like to publish or any other research products that they would like to take out of the repository, then they would submit another request to the tribe, and then if that gets approved, they'd be able to take that out and disseminate it, which I'm going to talk about next. So one of the many benefits to having a garden is growing fruits and vegetables. So in our metaphorical TDR garden, our fruits and vegetables are the various research products like publications, graphs, tables, presentations, you name it. And the other thing that makes our tribal data repository not like others is that in order for anything to be removed from the TDR, it has to be approved by the tribe and in alignment with the tribe's benefit that has been predetermined by the tribe. So a tribe must agree that the research product aligns with what they wanted to see from that research, therefore the seeds must be saved from that fruit for future generations. So this added protection happens through a research product agreement, which is added to the data use agreement that the researcher and the tribe signed previously. In the agreement, the researcher will state what products they want to remove from the TDR and what the purposes of that use will be when they remove it from the TDR. Once the tribe agrees, the research product will be made available for download by the researcher, and the researcher would be able to disseminate the research product. So in our metaphor, the fruits of the plant can then be turned into a delicious garden salsa and then removed from the garden and shared with the community. This allows for transparency in the research process and ensures that the interpretation of results is approved by the tribe or community so as to avoid harmful stereotypes of our communities or misrepresentations or interpretations of our data. So I'm going to walk you through a quick demo, if it comes up, and we'll talk about the user portal login process, and you'll be able to see the dashboard, which is shown on the top of the screen here, and also the projects page that has been developed. Okay, so you see here in the top left, we have an administrator account, a researcher account in the top right, a community representative account, and a researcher 2 account. So the administrators will be for our D4I staff. The researcher in the top right account is a fully approved access researcher. The community representative is so that communities are able to monitor the access and use of their data in real time. And then the researcher 2 account, think of a more limited researcher that only has certain access to certain data for a project like a collaborator. But we're gonna see a login under the researcher account, which is gonna bring us to our user dashboard. So here you can see we can view the data dictionary that we use, you can request access to a new virtual machine, you can see how many virtual machines you as a researcher have open, and you can see what a brief overview of the status of the projects that you have submitted are within your dashboard. In a second here, we're gonna click into the data dictionary, which you'll be able to view, and we'll also click into the virtual machine space, which you will be able to see a more detailed view of. So when we click in here, you can see the data dictionary that we are currently using of common data elements. And that is how it'll be laid out for each researcher. And then you can click into the virtual machine space, and this researcher doesn't have any virtual machines open at this time, so there's not a lot of information there right now. But this would be very well detailed for our researcher. You'll also be able to see in this one the access to that specific projects page. Which is going to give you more detailed information about the different projects that we have, that this researcher has. So you can see in the bar at the top, we have our project title, project ID, the community that they're working with. You can see the status, you can see any actions that the researcher needs to take next, and then also any agreements that have been signed between the researcher and the community are available through our portal. So in the first one, you can see that it's approved, and their next actions are to open up a virtual machine space to conduct that analysis, which they can do right from this page. And then you can also see ones like requested revisions. So the tribe has the opportunity during that detailed research proposal process to ask for any revisions to that proposal, right? So it doesn't have to be just approve or deny. They can also request changes to that project if they think that it's almost in alignment but not quite there. And then that would be sent back to the researcher, and the researcher, it would be their job to then update that and send it back in for that full approval. And then you can also see ones that have been denied at the bottom. And then all of those actions are laid out in that actions column. And then you will see here that if you click through, you can also open up over in this top right corner here, you can open up a new project request if you'd like to from this page, and you can also download any of those agreements from this page as well.
We want to also highlight some of the benefits of this repository. First is that the public health data utilized has so much potential. We've only skimmed the surface. And we can learn from each other and help one another, like sharing spicy recipes from the garden, or lessons learned in gardening. One type of plant could work with other types of plants, like other data types. Another great benefit is the transparency in research we provide. Because we want to make sure tribes are involved in the data management processes. This is like saving seeds, which Sakaya mentioned earlier. It helps break harmful or extractive cycles of research being conducted in our communities. We don't need to re-ask the same questions, and we don't need to throw the plants away after and go to the store again. We can save the seeds for the next growing season. Another benefit that the TDR creates for our tribal communities is storing knowledge and accumulating experience so that tribes can adapt efficiently, even with leadership changes, just like perennials do. These plants are planted once and return every year and grow from experience. You could think about how a tree grows and adapts and provides for future generations shade and fruit, food, construction materials, and they survive a lot. Maybe a forest fire, lightning, maybe their roots are growing around a stone in the earth, or they're lifting up sidewalks to keep going, right? So that resilience is similar to how the TDR provides long-term stories and lessons for our people, just like our relatives of the trees and other plants. And of course, the overarching benefit is that tribes get to assert their sovereignty over their data like a rainbow. It provides our garden with the beauty of color and inspiration in our work, and its reach is boundless. There is no end to our sovereignty, and when you eat the fruit of the TDR garden, you will taste the rainbow. I almost didn't say that, okay. So feel free to take a picture of this slide to learn more. You can follow us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Or you can go to our website, d4itdr.org, for updates and to check out resources that we're sharing, including educational videos. You can email us, and I know some people in the audience have attended this, but we offer Indigidata, a week-long data science education workshop every summer that you can learn more about at indigidata.org. In addition, with all these smart people in the room, we are seeking authors to write pieces for the D4I TDR collection on Indigenous Data Sovereignty in Public Health. This collection will be made available on our website in the SEEDS database, which stands for Sharing Essential Education and Data for Sovereignty. It's a hub for resources about Indigenous data sovereignty. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code here and fill out the form to get more information and express your interest in commissioning the paper. It is paid, okay. Lastly, check out our colleague Dr. Cherie Peters' session, Indigenous Data Sovereignty is Very Demure, Very Mindful, on Saturday at 8:30 a.m. in room 205A. And with all of this, we would just like to say we're trying to be like pollinators, supporting our whole ecosystem. That's our goal. Thank you, Miigwech, Wopila, Pidamia, to all of you for attending this session. We're very grateful for your attention to this topic and our work. And thank you to our team and funder. We are seeking future funding for the repository. And if time allows, we can take questions now. I think we have about 10 or so minutes. Thank you so much.